The gravel road ended in a black field of dishes, pale as dead moons. They sat in a ring around the administrative block, immense and mute, their bowls tilted to catch a sky that held no stars, only low clouds and the occasional blink of aircraft far off over the North Sea. The observatory had been decommissioned 2 years earlier, but the director still paid for a night guard. Tonight, that guard was me. Easy work, the agency had promised. Sit, read, do a couple rounds. At night, it's quiet. They were right about the quiet. The place had a way of swallowing sound. Even the wind seemed to hesitate at the fence and curl back into the hedges. My car clicked as it cooled. My footsteps sounded like someone else's in the drenched grass. I swiped the fob, shouldered the heavy door open, and felt the building breathe me in. Old concrete, coolant, hot dust. Inside, the foyer's fluorescence flickered into life, greenish and unreliable. A laminated sheet hung beside the desk. Round 1, 0200. Round 2, 0400. Doors checked, panels locked. Keep the array in park. A handwritten note across the bottom in a cramped, impatient script. No tours. No exceptions. I had never been here. The map on the wall showed a simple loop through labs and storage, stairs up to the control room that overlooked the dishes, and a break room tucked behind the server hall. The supervisor who handed me the fob had warned me about the lift. Use the stairs, less temperamental. The intercom, never worked right. And the dish motors, don't touch any toggles unless you see fire. I laughed then. I didn't now. The break room was a thin rectangle with a long window. On the other side of the glass, a dark corridor ran away like a throat. There was a humming fridge, a kettle with scale on the element, a brittle box of tea. I put water on, set my logbook on the table, and turned the chair to face the window so I could watch the corridor while the kettle grumbled. It comforted me to see the faint exit sign at the far end, the way it made a green island in the dark. It made me feel less alone. When the kettle clicked off, something clicked again, farther away. A relay, maybe. The hum rose a notch, then settled. I tried the tea. It tasted like dust and tin. At 0130, I started my first slow round. Doors closed, latches in place, the smell of old rubber mats and colder air seeping from the server hall. The labs were stripped of equipment, bench tops bare except for a few ring marks where beakers used to be. I swept my light along labels on drawers, spare coax, fiber patches, misc, like I was reading a list of spells. At the base of the stairwell, I paused with my hand on the rail. The hum came from above now, faint as pressure. It vibrated in my teeth. The metal stair treads were damp with the sea's breath. My boots made tiny squeaks. Halfway up, I heard a whistle, brief and thin, as if someone breathed across a bottle. I stopped and it stopped. I started and it started again. By the time I reached the control room door, the whistle had become a soft tone that swelled and ebbed with my breath. The control room felt like a ship's bridge. The glass ran in a long curve, showing me my own face, and beyond it, the white backs of the dishes in the night. There were rolling chairs, a bank of dead monitors, a few that still burned with number readouts that didn't seem to change, and fly carcasses in the corners. In the center, like a little altar, stood the manual control panel for the array. Its toggles were capped with rubber. Each was labeled with a neat engraved plaque: azimuth, elevation, park, track, emergency stop. Park's lamp glowed a steady orange. Good. My reflection in the glass looked tired. I raised my hand to check my hair, then pretended I meant to wave at myself. The reflection's hand came up a fraction late, like the feeblest of echoes. I felt a quick spark of annoyance at the glass. My mind labeled it lag. I didn't like the word, but I didn't know why. The intercom popped. The sound was small but sudden in all that quiet. I turned. The intercom was a beige square set into the wall with a metal grill and a cracked button. It had a label like the toggles, old-fashioned and tidy. Intercom, array yard. Observatory security, I said, trying to make my voice round and bored. Do you require assistance? The intercom hissed like someone's breath. Then a muffled syllable, or maybe the wind pushing past a microphone. I leaned in. Say again? The hiss softened into a thin, steady tone, the same tone as the stairwell, only now it was inside the room with me. I put my thumb over the button. It was slick. Through the glass, in the ring of dishes, one of the bowls shifted almost imperceptibly, as if it were checking its posture. The orange park lamp stayed steady. I wrote a line in my logbook, 0137, intercom hiss, possible interference. One dish appears to move 2 degrees. Park show steady. On my way back down the stairs, the tone followed. It woke something old in me, like the way an MRI machine makes the edges of your vision pulse. In the break room, I sat with my tea, chair tipped so I could watch both the kettle and the long window. The corridor on the other side was empty. The exit sign hummed softly, as if answering the intercom. A calm moment. I took it. The calm cracked at 0202. The radio on the desk, an old VHF unit, its antenna taped where it had split, blared with dense static. It wasn't the open crackle I knew from the agency scanner. It was wet, full of teeth, like frying oil. I flinched hard enough to knock my cup. It skidded and fell and shattered. Tea ran under the window and pooled against the baseboard, reflecting a sliver of green exit light. The radio cut off mid-hiss. The room remembered how to be quiet. I climbed back to the control room. The intercom was now a soft, constant breath. The glass held my face and beyond the dishes. I moved my hand again. The reflection rose late again, more noticeably this time. The muscles along my spine tightened. When I lowered my hand, I kept my eye on its reflection. I let my real hand hang still. The reflected one hung still too. I waited. The reflected one twitched, the smallest twitch, as if it had thought I had started to move, as if it were guessing me and guessing wrong. I turned away, heart sweating. The manual panel had a folded sheet of paper tucked behind it. I pulled it loose. It was a maintenance log from a year before decommission. The entry at the top read, phase lock drift during night track, echo and control feedback, visual artifacts on glass. Someone had drawn a little face next to it, a smile with too many tally lines for teeth. A thud came from the hallway outside the control room. Not a big one. The kind of thud that a foot makes when it misjudges the last step. I walked to the door and opened it on the corridor. It ran straight and empty. A strip of light rippled across the floor, as if a person had just passed through another door further on. But there were no doors further on, just the end wall. I shut the door. The soft tones swelled until it was almost music, then fell. The glass showed me my hollow cheeks, the ring of dishes, the faintest suggestion of motion in the corner of the room, behind me. I turned. Nothing. The fly carcasses, the temperature readout, 14.9 degrees Celsius, the maintenance log in my hand, and this other thing, the certainty that I was not alone, not because I had heard anything, but because the muscles in my forearms had tightened without my asking them to, and because the inside of my mouth tasted of old pennies. A printer on a lower shelf chattered to life. The sound was cheerful, domestic, ridiculous in that place. A strip of thermal paper crept out with numbers, a grid of coordinates and timestamps. 53, 53.31 twin, 0.18 E. As if they'd been written by a .186 E. The same. Down the strip, interleaved lines in a smaller font. Hello, hello. I didn't like the way the H's softened at the edges, as if they'd been written by a warm mouth on cold glass. I tore the strip free and dropped it in the bin. The bin was empty. No, not empty. Curled among dust and dead flies lay another strip, longer, older. I fished it out. The same coordinates, the same time, the same hello. Only this hello had a name tucked close against it. Hello, my name. The typeface was the same. The slight blur at the edges where heat met cool air was the same. The date at the top read 029-1908, which was tonight. The strip was old. The strip was cold. My hands shook. I pressed my palm to the manual panel. Rubber caps, smooth as old erasers. The orange park light, steady, steady. I didn't trust it. I reached for the emergency stop. The air pressure shifted in the room. My ear popped as if a door had opened somewhere far away and very large. The intercom hiss deepened into something like a voice trying to decide what shape my name should take. "Who's here?" I said. My voice fought the dry air. "This site is closed. Identify yourself." The intercom whispered my name back, not like a recording, like a rehearsal. A pale face flickered on one of the dead monitors, as if someone had set a candle behind it. The candle was my eyes. They looked out of the screen, then away, then back, as if searching for the me that stood in front of the glass. I watched my hand on the emergency stop. On the screen, my hand hovered near the toggles. Then the screen me smiled, broad and wrong and far too certain, and placed his finger on track. The track lamp on my panel stayed dark. Park glowed on. I didn't move. Screen me did. The dishes outside rotated with a slow, massy grace, like whales. The sound reached me not with my ears, but with the nerves of my arms against the panel. The orange park light flickered. The intercom stopped whispering. It breathed in, held it, held it. I slammed the emergency stop. The room lurched under me as every motor in the complex died at once. The silence they left was a pressure. In it, a different sound lifted. Footsteps, deliberate and light, moving along the corridor outside the control room. They approached the door, paused, and then passed it. Farther on, the footsteps stopped. I waited for a door to open and close, but nothing did. The end wall had no door. I pulled the door open. The corridor was empty of bodies and full of me. Myself in the window glass on the other side of the break room stared back at me from 50 meters away, a tiny figure in a tiny square. He raised his hand. I didn't. He scratched his cheek. I didn't. He tilted his head with a little fox-like curiosity. I felt that curiosity in my neck and not in my arm. He smiled, small this time, apologetic, the way you smile at a friend you're about to ask for money. When I blinked, he moved. There is no trick to it. One moment he was a flat thing printed in light on a pane of glass. The next he was halfway along the corridor, and his shoes made soft whispering sounds, and his eyes were a little too dark, pupils wide as if he had been living in dim rooms. He carried my posture wrong, too careful. He walked like someone trying on a new body for fit. "Stop," I said, and that felt like asking a wave to sit. He didn't stop, but he didn't hurry. The tone from the dead intercom found a tooth again, and bit down. The glass of the control room reflected us as two shapes coming together, and the late lift of the reflection's hand was gone now. The delay had closed. We were in the same moment at last. He stopped just out of reach. I smelled damp wool and something sweeter beneath it, like plastic warm from a pocket. "Hello," he said. He said it in my voice, but there was a little catch at the end of the word, a little unfamiliarity that made the hairs on my forearms rise. "I'm sorry. It was too loud where I was. I had to come here." "Where?" My throat felt full of lint. He glanced past me at the panel. His eyebrows made the thinking crease that mine make. "Behind," he said lightly, as if talking to a child. "Just behind." He reached toward me, palm up, the way you hold out your hand to show you don't have a weapon. I saw it then, the burn scar on his palm that I didn't have. A perfect oval, shiny and pink, like the mark a hot cup leaves on a cheap table. "You're not me," I said stupidly. His mouth softened with something like sympathy. "One of us won't be for long." My hand closed on the emergency stop again, even though it was already down. He watched it. His eyes flicked to the panel where track sat unlit and Park glowed steady. He wasn't watching for the lamps. He was watching what my hand would do. He was getting ready to copy it. I moved fast, not because I had a plan, but because my body had chosen one without me. I grabbed the maintenance log and flung it at his face. He ducked, too late, or exactly as late as I had expected him to. The paper brushed his cheek and fell. I stepped into him and shoved. He was solid. He wasn't glass, he wasn't radio, he was weight and heat and resistance. He slid on the damp stairwell tread and hit the wall. A human, physical sound. It made my stomach turn. He lunged back, and his hand closed around my wrist. He was strong. I was not going to outmuscle him. He tried to pull my hand away from the panel. I let him, then kicked his knee. It folded a little, a flawed machine. He hissed and smiled as if I had passed a test. Then we were grappling against the panel, rubber caps cold under my knuckles, the intercom tone climbing a ladder of notes so quickly it approached a scream without ever arriving there. His face was close to mine. Beneath the plastic warmth on his clothes was another scent, very faint, like ozone after someone peels tape. I threw the heel of my hand into his nose. He softened again with that pitying look, and my stomach turned again, because I knew that look. I had worn it. On bad nights, I had thought I was a kind person because I felt sorry for the other version of me that made mistakes. Maybe I wasn't kind at all. Maybe I was rehearsing. His free hand searched for a toggle. I guessed which one he wanted. I stopped guessing and slapped track down myself. The lamp stayed dark. Park burned. For a heartbeat, we were two animals, panting and tangled, feeling the way a button feels under a finger, waiting for the click that changes everything. Nothing changed. "Why can't you go back?" I asked, the question stupid and enormous, and the only one I could think to give shape to the terror. His mouth opened. Another smile, smaller now, patient. "You pulled me through," he said. "You keep pulling. You just did." I let go of the panel and him and stumbled backward until my shoulders hit the glass. Behind it, the night had arranged the cloud into a darker spiral, and the dishes were just pale edges around it, like the rim of plates. He watched me move and didn't follow. His head tilted with that fox curiosity. "I don't want," I started. "To be here?" He nodded. "Me neither." The intercom stopped singing. The silence afterward was so complete that the building's thermal pops sounded like knuckles cracking. Somewhere in the lower floor, water ran for a second in a pipe and stopped. Time had shifted into the kind of night where anything that happens feels like a personal decision by the dark. He stepped forward again, very gently, and set his warm, scarred palm against the glass next to my shoulder. The reflection put its hand up, too. I had always hated the smear my skin left on windows. Now I hated that I could not tell which smear was mine. "Let's end it," he said, folding his voice around the words like tender hands. "You rest, I watch. Next shift we change." The simplicity was obscene. I think I laughed. It wasn't the sound I meant to make. It had an edge on it. I realized I had been making that sound under my breath since I walked in, little abortive laughs like knots in thread. "Or," I said, and I reached for the manual panel again, "we cut the line." He laughed then, bright, delighted. "We're so dramatic," he said, meaning me, meaning us. I yanked the emergency stop up, then slammed it down again. The lamps on the panel died, even Park. The dishes outside sagged fractionally in the wind, as if relieved of duty. The building moaned somewhere deep in its ribs. For one suspended moment, there was no hum, no tone, no breath. He and I were the only sound. Two hearts, two sets of lungs, two tiny scrapes of boot on floor. Then from somewhere I didn't understand, maybe the server hall, maybe the earth under the foundations, the tone came back, low like a foghorn, rising slow. His head tipped back. He blinked. Tears sprang to his eyes as if from sudden light. He smiled a real smile, one I knew. "Behind," he whispered, and his breath fogged the glass. He was gone. The corridor outside was empty again. The strip of thermal paper lay where I had dropped it. The intercom was dead. The control room glass held only one face. I stayed until 04, then 05, then until 6:20, when the cloud lightened to a color like very old milk, and the hedges outside learned how to be green again. I wrote 3 pages of log in a tight hand that did not look like mine. When I finally walked out to my car, the dishes hunched in their ring. A bird landed on the rim of the nearest one and pecked at something invisible. At the car, I stopped because my reflection in the window looked wrong. Not late, perfectly in time. Not smiling, expressionless. I lifted my hand, it lifted its hand. I turned my wrist, it turned its wrist. On its palm, a perfect oval scar shone pale as a coin. I looked at my own palm. The skin there was unmarked except for a faint red ring where the kettle's handle must have pressed. I stood there, listening to the last of the night crackle out of the dish motors, and felt the old penny's taste return to my mouth. In the glass, the scarred reflection stared with my eyes. Behind me, the building doors shut themselves with a deep, satisfied sound, as if something inside had gone back where it belonged. I put my palm against the window anyway. It was cold. The reflection's palm met it, scar to unscar, and for the briefest breath, the glass felt less like a barrier and more like skin. A tremor moved through the dishes in the field, subtle enough to be wind. Then I got in, turned the key, and drove the gravel road without looking in the rearview mirror, because the mirror has always been a bad habit of mine, and this morning I was very determined to keep only the good ones. Behind me, the array watched the sky. In the rear view, because of course I looked, once at the gate, I saw myself lift a hand in the control room glass, a fraction late, as if saying goodbye, or rehearsing how to do it the next time. I told myself it would only be an hour. The district's tech coordinator had called earlier, apologetic and harried. Their attendance servers were glitching, Monday's data hadn't synced, and the system needed a manual kick. "It's straightforward," she'd promised. "Go to the principal's office at Sable Ridge Secondary, log into the console, follow the steps. Our custodian will let you in at 7. You'll be done by 8. I'd never set foot in Sable Ridge. I didn't even grow up in this district. But contract work is contract work, and straightforward with a bonus attached sounded like rent. By the time I parked, daylight had thinned to a blue bruise on the horizon. The building rose out of it like a ship, all glass and red brick and precise angles turned shadow-soft. A lone light burned behind the front office, fluorescent hum audible even through the door. A woman in a yellow safety vest, Annika, she said, met me with keys on a retractable belt and the resigned energy of someone who'd seen every flavor of weird at night and learned not to name any of it. All alarms off in admin and East Wing, she said, swiping a badge. West Wing's closed. Don't go there. Why? The word slid out before I could keep it. Waxed floors. She didn't smile. And it's colder. Old pipes. She pushed open the heavy door. Follow the gray line to the office. There's a map inside if you get turned around. Past the vestibule, the school's breath hit me. The sweet chemical of cleaner, old paper dry as husks, the metallic tang of lockers and radiator dust. Light spilled from ceiling panels in long bars, buzzing slightly out of sync with one another, so that the hallway sounded like a chorus of electric bees. The gray line on the waxed floor, a scuffed strip of paint, led me into the administrative offices, where the air felt warmer, stale. A corkboard held announcements, homecoming dance washed out to pink by the sun, no food outside cafeteria in Comic Sans, a schedule printed wrongly and corrected by hand. At the far end, a glass-walled office glowed. The principal's name was stenciled on the door, Dr. Hollis. Inside, a desk with a broad monitor asleep, a stack of manila folders cinched with a rubber band, a plastic plant glossy with dust. The screen woke to my tap and presented the familiar login prompt. I cracked my knuckles and told myself, again, it would only be an hour. When the bell rang, I flinched, not because it was loud, it wasn't, but because of the way it was wrong. Bells in schools are supposed to ring with purpose, all thrum and metal, a call and a release. This sound was shaved down to something tentative, like a hand knocking from a long hallway away. I glanced to the corner of the office where an analog clock hung crooked. The second hand jerked up, paused, then hopped back as if reconsidering. It was 7:11. I sat. The district email had included a list of steps and a temporary admin password. I typed carefully, the keys crisp under my fingers. The cursor pulsed. Somewhere behind me, in the deeper bones of the school, a locker door clanged. Anika, I thought, or pipes. I kept my eyes on the screen. The attendance console came up, columns of names, columns of codes. The interface was the standard district software's bleached maw, cheerful in the way only software designed for compliance can be. The task was to purge a backlog file and force a resync. Easy enough. As I selected a menu item, the intercom crackled, the pop of a microphone being thumbed, a hiss of air. Evening, I said aloud without meaning to, as if you say hello to a house the first time you're alone in it. A high, spidery thread of feedback climbed, held, then dropped. Silence. I forced my gaze to the console and navigated to the right pane. Clear cache, confirm, begin resync. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, soft, rubber soles. I spun in the chair, heart up. Through the office glass, the corridor lay empty. A stretch of tile and doors with little windows, trophy case glinting. If someone had walked by, they'd have had to pass that gleam. No shadow crossed it. Anika, I called. No answer. From the hall, a locker welded itself open with a pneumatic sigh, hinges slow. Then another. The air changed, cooler, as if the building had exhaled. Something metallic tapped rhythmically, like a pencil against a desk. I stood and stepped out from behind the desk. The corridor smelled suddenly like damp wool. On the wall opposite, two laminated signs overlapped. Be safe, be kind, be present, and beneath it, a hand-drawn map of evacuation routes. Little blue arrows looped and doubled back, the west wing shaded over in marker. Hello, I tried again. My voice sounded like it had been graded. C, maybe C-. The intercom popped. A new sound came through, flat as cardboard, a voice reading names in monotone, syllables stacked without heat. Abrams, Allen, Alvarez, Anderson. It was the precise cadence of an attendance call, the kind that rises and falls 100 times a day without anyone hearing it. The speaker in the ceiling had the grain of old recordings, a shiver of dust in the sound. I laughed, pointless, the way you do when something is almost familiar but tilted wrong. Someone had cued yesterday's announcements, or the PA had a loop. Even so, I didn't like the way my mouth had gone dry. I turned back to the office to finish quickly and stopped. The monitor showed the console updating rows, status messages refreshing. But in the far right column, student, one entry blinked where nothing had been before. It had my last name, spelled correctly, but with the letters stretched, as if pulled by someone who didn't understand handwriting would be easier. I moved the mouse to edit the field and touch-typed in an unthinking rush. Wrong record, wrong user. The mouse arrow slid a fraction slower than it should have, like it was pushing through heavy sap. The screen blipped and a tooltip appeared, cheerful bubble. Please proceed to your assigned seat. The chair behind me skittered an inch on its casters, as if nudged. My breath condensed on the office glass, thinly, though it wasn't cold enough for that. It was no longer an hour in my mind. It was 20 minutes, 15. Done. I pulled my backpack over one shoulder and stepped into the hallway. The lights along the ceiling hummed louder, a slow dim surge and return that made the walls seem to flex. A poster taped slightly crooked above the counselor's door fluttered, though there was no draft. You belong here, in institutional teal. Beyond it, the trophy case's reflections stretched the corridor into a funhouse. My face there was a smudge, taller, a little off. I didn't look long. The gray line on the floor forked at a T, its paint in one direction scuffed out and re-rolled in the other. I followed it toward the front entrance. The air grew cooler with every step. A drinking fountain burbled, then shut itself off with a cough. My footsteps sounded wrong. First a tap, then an echo half a beat behind, as if something was walking just a little late. The intercom continued its roll call. Carlton, Carr, Carter. At the end of the corridor, the front doors waited, glass darkly reflective. The handles gleamed under their guard sleeves. I pushed. They didn't move. I checked the metal bar where the alarm plate would be. The little diode blinked green, ready. The latch had been dogged. I tried a little harder. The door rocked but held with a rubbery stubbornness, like pushing against someone's shoulder blade. My breath fogged the glass more sharply now. Somewhere back in the belly of the building, something dropped. A textbook or a stack of papers, the impact a flat smack that carried as if the hall had been a megaphone. Okay, I said, to nobody, to the door, to the idea of it all. Okay. I turned and found that the exit sign above the door didn't say exit anymore. It said office, in the same red, letters crisp. It was a stupid prank to pull with a projector, if that was what it was. But there was no projector. And the letters bled slightly at the edges, as if they'd always been there, and my brain had rearranged itself to notice. When I looked away and looked back, it said exit again, as unchanged as a courtroom. I followed the gray line back past the office and kept going toward the auditorium. I told myself it was strategic. Big room, lots of doors, maybe one that opened without a badge. But the truth is simpler. Places like this shape the way you move. Schools, hospitals, malls, they have currents. The auditorium was the deepest pool. The lobby before it was a rectangle in marble and shadow. A glass case held costumes on headless dress forms. A felt lion with a stitched mouth. A prom dress that had dulled to old lace yellow. The posters on the wall listed past productions. Our Town, The Crucible, something called the Attendance Committee that had to be an ironic student piece. The auditorium doors were heavy and opened exactly as far as my shoulder would allow, with a complaint of hinges. Beyond them, rows upon rows of seats unfolded like ribs, and the stage lay at the front under a curtain that didn't quite rest. It breathed, a slow lift and settle, as if eddies in the HVAC kept catching the velvet and snaring it. The PA crackled. Present? The voice said in that same paper-flat cadence. The question pushed through the ductwork. Sure, I said, and immediately hated the joke. I walked down the aisle. The carpet swallowed my footfalls. At the stage, a wooden lectern waited under a cone of light. On it lay a book older than everything around it. No branding, no hologram labels, just cracked brown cover, paper swollen by time and fingerprints. When I opened it, dust jumped in little dancers. Names marched in ink across the pages, and beside each, in pencil, neat check marks and slashes and a teacher's initials. Halfway down the current page, my name appeared again, first and last. The middle initial was wrong, as if guessed. There are certain moments when your body knows before your brain. My fingertips had already lifted from the paper. My shoulders had already squared to run. The voice on the intercom wasn't one voice anymore. It was many, braided to sound like one, each threaded with its own patience. Please take your assigned seat. The doors will remain closed during instruction. From the aisle, seatbacks creaked, row by row, like polite people sitting. The air moved, settling against my neck. Annika, I said louder, if you're doing this, it's not funny. Silence, except for the building breathing. I made a choice. I would write in the book. I would draw a line through my name and write transferred. I would write withdrawn in block letters. Something in me had the stubborn confidence that rules can be fought with other rules. I sprinted up the side stairs, across the stage. Behind the curtain, lights slept like eyes with their lids half down. In the wings, the ropes were coiled, 1,000 black snakes. A side door with a crash bar flickered an electric green halo, and when I pushed it, it gave and then didn't, like pushing through gelatin. The intercom hummed. Please remain calm, the many voice said. Failure to comply will result in detention. The word had weight in a school in a way it doesn't outside. It wasn't punishment, it was place. On the stage next to the podium, someone had set a rubber stamp and an ink pad. Administrative red. The stamp's face read absent in sturdy serif. Next to it lay a date stamper with rolling numbers. My heart banged once, twice, in relief or fear. I could roll the date forward, I could stamp something official, I could mark the ledger and make it obey. The curtain moved as if exhaling. In the dark of the house, seatbacks groaned deeper. Shapes suggested themselves between rows. Not bodies, not exactly, but indentations in the air, like the foam left when you lift something heavy. There was no good decision left, so I made one quickly. I grabbed the date stamper, set it with inky fingers to tonight's date, my thumbs slicking uncertainly through the tiny wheels, and stamped the margin of the page hard enough to bruise the paper. Then I took the absent stamp, pressed it to the pad until the rubber drank red, and slammed it over my name. It did not print the word absent. The ink lifted, bled, and formed present in the same block type. The letters were so neat they looked pre-printed. The rubber in my hand burned cold. Something heavy stepped onto the stage behind me. It was not a foot. It had that same half-beat echo my footsteps had had, but reversed, like a delay pedal set too long. I didn't turn around. The intercom closed now, soft as breath in my ear said thank you. I tore the page. I didn't plan on it. I just did. Paper resisted, then ripped with a wet surrender. The sound was appalling in the auditorium's hush. The hair on my arms lifted, every follicle noticing. The house hissed as if air had rushed in to fill something. I ran. The stage stairs were too many and not enough. My legs had the slow syrup of a dream. At the back of the auditorium, the lobby door that had resisted before swung noiselessly. I hit the hallway and saw that the signs on the walls had changed again. Take your seat, they said in the district's cheerful teal. The gray line on the floor divided and divided again, so many branches they looked like veins. Detention, the intercom murmured, and the light over the door at the end of the hallway went from green to red to green. The color changed with no change in truth. I did not go to detention. I found the principal's office by smell. The coffee, gone sour at the bottom of a cup, the fried dust aroma of a computer's fan. I slammed through the glass door and went for the monitor, still glowing. The console's status window had stopped. The column with my name was blank. The tooltip reappeared. Chipper bubble. Sign out before leaving. There on the desk, under the keyboard, sat a different stamp, one I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it had been there all along, and my brain had filtered it out as irrelevant. Maybe it had not. Its face read withdrawn, transferred. The ink pad beside it had dried to a stiff cake, cracked. A bottle of red sat next to that, cap unscrewed. The notion that Dr. Hollis would ever stamp a student with that word felt obscene. But I didn't let myself be surprised anymore. I flooded the pad and pressed the stamp until the rubber was slick. My hands shook. I opened the ledger to the ripped page, which shouldn't have been here. Had I brought it with me? It lay there anyway, like it had every right to. I pressed the stamp down, hard enough that the handle cut crescents into my palm. Withdrawn appeared in a blocky scar. The air in the room thinned. The intercom's hiss receded a fraction, the way tide recedes to show teeth. A distant door opened, not an invitation, an adjustment. I didn't wait to see which. I ran, following nothing now but the smell of the world outside, the memory of cars, wet concrete, air that isn't recycled 1,000 times. The front doors gave like breath this time. I hit the cold like an animal and kept going to my car, only stopping when my hand missed the handle twice and caught it the third time. In the rearview mirror, the school stood with its windows black, a single exit sign inside burning stubbornly in inverted red. I expected the intercom to find me out here, a voice in the wind telling me I was late. But the night was a night again, ordinary as the hum of a street lamp. I slept badly. In the morning, a white envelope with the district's logo wedged itself under my door as if someone had slid it at 6 a.m., the way a landlord does. Inside, on bright printer paper that smelled faintly of toner and hand oil, a letter thanked my guardian for their attention. It noted in kindly language that I had been absent yesterday. It explained the importance of being present to learn. There were boxes where someone had checked present 3 times, perhaps by mistake, once for Monday, once for Tuesday, once for a date a week from now. The bottom indicated an expected detention after hours 7 to 9 p.m. until absence is corrected. I turned the page. Stapled to the back was a photocopy of a class photo I had never sat for. I was easy to pick out, second row, slightly left of center. My face had been caught mid-blink, mouth open as if to answer. The caption under it had my name completely right this time, middle initial and all. As I stared at it, somewhere in my apartment, a soft chime rang. Not my phone, not the oven. A polite school bell, shaved down, knocking from a long hallway away. It rang once and then again, at perfect intervals. The sound did what it always does if you've been conditioned to it. It put my heart on a leash and tugged. I stood very still. On the inside of my wrist, in red that paled as I watched, a stamp I didn't remember receiving bled to the surface. Tardy. I pressed my thumb to it as if I could smudge it out. The skin was cool. The ink didn't smear. The bell rang again, and a voice that was no one's and many's, flat as a hallway and huge as a building, clear as if the speaker was inside my wall. Please proceed to your assigned seat. I wasn't supposed to be there at all. I'd meant to ride 2 stops on the Green Line, get off at Oosterdok, and walk the last 5 minutes to my sublet. I'd only moved to the city that week. Every sound felt new. The high, glassy whine when the train pulled in, the way the doors thudded closed like padded fists, the long sigh of pressurized air escaping from somewhere under the floor. I was tired enough to mistake the adrenal edge of being new for simple exhaustion. The carriage was warm, the windows smeared with a night of fingerprints, the bench soft enough that when the last few passengers got off, I leaned my head against the smeared glass and let the tunnel lights blink by like someone flicking a flashlight under a blanket. I didn't mean to fall asleep, but I did. When I woke, my phone said 042 and the carriage was empty. Every surface glowed with that end-of-night stillness, like the light itself had dried out. The train had stopped, the doors were open, the announcement chimed, and a recorded voice said very cheerfully, "End of the line. All passengers please exit. Mind the gap." The name of the station didn't play. I stood, wobbling, my backpack strap biting into my shoulder. Cold air breathed in through the open doors. I stepped out to a platform I didn't recognize. Unfamiliar doesn't begin to cover it. Everything was the same style as every other station. The blue tiles, the yellow line painted with rubbery grit, the convex security mirrors mounted like silver buttons near the stairs, but wrong in small ways that made my body want to shiver. The tiles weren't blue exactly, but the color of bruised fruit. Some of the letters had fallen off the platform signage, leaving little darker rectangles where they'd been. No one else was there. The train's interior lights slid along the platform as the carriage doors closed with a tired click. The announcement chimed again. "Mind the gap." "Wait," I said, but the doors were already sealed. The driver, if there was one, never looked back. The train sat there humming to itself, as if reluctant to leave the way a kid hesitates when asked to put a toy down. Then it slipped forward without a sound and disappeared into the tunnel, just the red eyes of its tail lamps dwindling. Silence flooded in behind it. Not empty silence, but thick with small things. The tick of a cooling escalator motor, the intermittent drip from somewhere far off that made a dark, wet dot on the edge of the platform. The smell was stale warmth and dust, as if the station itself had been sweating all day. I tasted metal on the back of my tongue. Okay, I said. Okay, Oosterdok by foot. I took out my phone. No service. The signal bars were just empty ladders. My battery sat at 22%. I woke the map and it spun, unable to find me. That was ridiculous. Underground, sure, but phones were clever and stations had Wi-Fi. Except this one had none. The network list was a blank white box. There were signs. There are always signs. The first one said in blocky enamel letters, platform, not platform 1 or 2, just platform. A worn arrow pointed right. I followed it. Another sign said exit and pointed left. Another said 2 trains and pointed right again. A diagram of the metro map in the glass case beside the ticket machine had been sun-faded so badly that the colors bled into each other. My eyes searched for the name of the station and found nothing. A rectangle had been rubbed in the dust, as if someone's finger had tried to outline a name that wasn't there. End of the line, the voice had said. Which line? Footsteps clicked softly in the distance. The way echoed steps can sound like someone else walking a half beat behind you. I froze. The echo froze too. I took another step. The echo was a shade late. Hello, I called. My own voice was small in that space. No reply. The escalator up toward the exit wasn't moving. You could hear its metal segments breathing against one another, a faint tick and scrape. On impulse, I put my foot on the step, and the escalator started on its own with a shudder, carrying me up into a tighter tunnel lined with white tiles. A fluorescent strip light flickered in an epileptic rhythm. At the top, the shutters of the ticket hall were rolled down like eyelids. A row of vending machines glowed for no one. Chips, candy, warm sodas sweating more than they should. One of the machines vibrated softly, the way a bass line makes your ribs feel loose. I tried the first exit gate. Locked. The second. Locked. The emergency door had a red lever behind a cracked plastic cover. I could picture the fine slipping moment of deciding whether to pull it, all the trouble it might cause, the shameful conversation with a tired officer in a bright vest. I didn't touch it. I'm not from here, I thought. I don't know how loudly the city screams when you pull its fire alarm. I checked my map again. My battery was at 19%. The screen showed me centered on a blank part of the grid, as if the city had a hole here. The first whisper came from the ceiling speaker. It wasn't the chime. I'd come to expect the gentle 2-note chime. This was quieter, a dry exhale of consonants, like someone speaking with chapped lips pressed against a microphone. It sounded like my name almost stretched thin. I looked up. Sorry? I said, because that is what people say to a speaker when a voice from nowhere mispronounces their name. A different chime sounded. Mine, the cheerful voice said again in the exact same cadence as before. Then, as if forgetting itself, it added, stand between. Between what? I laughed, too loudly in the empty hall, and the sound bounced and came back wrong. Back on the platform, the rails gleamed as if freshly licked. Standing there alone, you can feel the third rail, even without touching. A pressure, a sighing hum pitched just below the threshold of hearing that makes your teeth want to ache. Little bits of dark lint had blown into the gap between train and platform and eddied there, reluctant to commit to falling. I stared down. The gap was wider than it should be. Not by much, maybe 2 hand widths, maybe 3, but enough to feel it in your knees. I could see the crushed cans and ticket stubs in the trough, but the shadows in the gap were unusually dense. The light from above fell apart in there, interrupted by something that wasn't physical. The whispering speaker again, clearer this time, closer. I took a step back. In the mirror mounted to the pillar, a sleek oval reflecting a warped view of the platform, I saw myself stepping back. Behind me, this makes me sound dramatic, but I know what I saw. Even though there was no one there, the mirror showed the impression of a shape that could have been a person leaning in toward me. Not a figure, more the absence of one. If you've ever looked at a photo where someone has been poorly photoshopped out, you know the look. That wrongness, the way the world doesn't quite meet in the space they should occupy. I turned around fast, nothing. I turned back to the mirror. The wrongness held, a hollow in the reflection, a bend in the silver where something that wasn't there bent it. The next sound was not a sound. It was pressure and movement, air being shoved out of a tunnel by something large and fast. Wisps of dust lifted in delicate eddies along the platform. Somewhere way down the line, a rumbling grew. Relief washed through me so quickly it was almost tears. A train. Good. I would get on it and let it carry me anywhere with people. The headlights appeared, two white holes tearing at the dark. They grew. The rumble grew. I stepped back from the edge. The chime sounded. "Stand clear of the platform edge," the voice said, warm, soothing. The headlights got very bright. The wind buffeted me. I blinked, and the headlights went out, not flickered, not dimmed. Went out as if someone had drawn a blind. The rush of air still struck me in the chest, raking my clothes. The rumble shook the tiles under my feet. A train screamed through the station with its lights off. A deep, shuddering presence, more felt than seen. I glimpsed blank windows, black as black, reflections of the platform lights stretched and broken across them. In that instant, my brain making sense of the blur, I saw my own face reflected in one of the windows as it passed, but not my face now. My face asleep against the smeared glass of the carriage earlier. My head tilted like a child. The reflection blinked very slowly and then was gone. The empty lit platform snapped back into place. Silence clenched down again. The grit the wind had lifted settled in a skin on my tongue. "Okay," I whispered. "Nope, no thank you." I jogged to the end of the platform, walked past the yellow line because I suddenly hated having that too close space fall away right beside me, and found the service stairs. There's always a door marked "No Public Access" that is just tragically unlocked. This one was. The hinges squealed with a wet, meaty sound that I wish had just been rust. Behind it, a narrow stairway led down to a low, tunnel-like corridor, with cables bundled along one wall, and a painted line that read "Walkway. Do not step off." The air down there was colder by several degrees, like a mouth breathing in. Somewhere far off, a drop fell into water, and the sound went traveling. "Maintenance," I called, half hoping for an irritated human voice telling me to get out. "Hello, I'm lost." The chime sounded from a speaker right above my head. The speaker was old, metal grill, paint flaking, and wet around the edges as if someone had breathed against it for a long time. The chime had the wrong number of notes. Then, in a voice that could have been mine if you sanded it down to the grain, it said, "We've been waiting." "We?" My mouth was dry. "Who's we?" "The part that is not the train," it said cheerfully. "Mind the gap." I remembered reading years ago some comment thread about how the phrase was originally a technical reminder and not a warning. You said it to staff so they didn't whack their shins stepping between cars. It felt stupid and unreachable, like a memory from childhood you can't be sure is yours. My brain showed me a diagram of a platform edge, a dotted oval between the platform and the car. The gap. Between platform and world, my eyes supplied from nowhere. Where did that come from? A shadow touched my shoe. No, a draft, surely. But when I looked down, something darker than the darkness around it lay across the toe of my trainer, like an eel briefly coiling there. It drew back as if startled. A sound, half electrical, half angry insect, thrummed in the wires on the wall. At the far end of the corridor, under the dim light, the shadows were thick and beautiful and alive in a way I had never thought shadows could be. They weren't reaching hands. That would have been easier. They were the shape of where hands should be and weren't. Negations. Remember the hollow in the mirror? Imagine that, crawling. I stumbled back and my shoulder hit a red-painted cabinet. Behind its glass pane was a big lever with a tag that read, in several languages, "Traction Current Emergency Trip." A laminated card dangling on a string explained that pulling it would cut power to the third rail in the adjacent section, and trips were logged and fines assessed and apologies had to be made. Between the maze of sentences, my eyes greedy picked a few. Danger. Do not. Authorized personnel. Mind the chime above me coughed. Don't. The corridor light flickered. The shadows at the far end surged forward a small, delightful degree, the way fish do when you toss bread on the water. I understood then, not in words but in a way my chest knew, that they lived in the edge, that they shaped themselves in the negative space when train kissed platform and left, in that blink of not there, a long, sweet absence. That the announcement wasn't a warning, it was a prayer. It was an invitation. Mind the gap, attend it, put your attention there, your mind there, and they come to what you offer and drink. I don't know how I knew. Maybe that's what they do. They explain themselves right into your head. The speaker adopted a coaxing tone that would have been my mother's if my mother had ever stood me by a busy road and said, "Step forward." "You are very tired," it said, and the mouth of the corridor seemed to widen like a yawn. "Only a step." "Okay," I said, voice shaking. "Here's a thought." The glass over the lever was already cracked. I rammed my elbow into it. Pain lit my arm. The pain shattered with a tidy, respectable sound. The station groaned. I grabbed the lever and pulled. You don't hear electricity until it's not there. The hum that had been under everything, fell away and left the air like the air after a storm, new and raw. The light surged, dimmed, surged again. I could hear my own breathing as if through a stethoscope. The shadows in the corridor flinched. That's the only word for it. Flinched, like something skulking in a doorway when you slam a pot. They recoiled along the wires, scampering. Then they came again, angry now, faster than before, slithering along the painted line and spilling over it, discovering they could cross when the music was wrong. "Not allowed," the speaker hissed in a tone that was almost a child sulking and almost a dog growling. "You are not authorized." "Neither are you," I said, because fear makes you stupid and brave. I ran. The maintenance corridor plunged into a set of stairs. I took them two at a time. The station seemed to twist as I climbed. The walls felt closer, then suddenly far, like a hall of mirrors. The chiming moved through the station with me, as if the sound system wasn't wired but organic, chasing. A poster for flu shots peeled off the tile like shedding skin. I barreled through the no public access door back onto the platform and cut left, sprinting. The air behind me felt busy, as if behind my back the negative space of my own silhouette had gone eager and lapped at my heels. Up the escalator, over the turnstiles. The emergency door's red lever came off in my hand like a cheap toy. The alarm took a fractional second to realize it ought to shriek. When it did, it was human loud and glorious. I shoved through to the street. Night slapped me in the face. The station entrance was just another hole in the city. Signage humming, a few empty rental bikes glinting under a street lamp, the canal lustrous and black beyond. The air tasted of rain on hot stone. A car passed, tires hissing. The sound system in the station was still screeching behind me like I'd broken a taboo. I walked very fast. I didn't look back. Upstairs in my sublet, the radiator ticked as it cooled. My heartbeat took 10 whole minutes to stop landing like a thrown shoe against the inside of my ribs. I sat on the edge of the bed with my backpack still on, the strap a familiar bite in my shoulder, and laughed a little with that loose, breathless relief that feels like you've just gotten away with shoplifting your own life back. I plugged my phone in. It buzzed once to tell me it had recognized the charger. Then it made a sound I hadn't heard it make before. A two-note chime, soft, cheerful, so normal you'd never think to fear it unless you knew it in your bones. I stared at the screen. No notification, no app open. The charging icon pulsed. From the tinny speaker on the bottom edge of the phone, in a voice whose cadence I now could have picked out of an ocean of identical voices, came the gentlest instruction in the world. Mind the gap. In the radiator, in the window frame, in the little spaces between my books and the shelf, a breeze moved that wasn't there. The apartment had so many edges, I realized. So many in-betweens. The city had them. The world had them. The place where hand doesn't become hand, but the emptiness around it quivers with possibility. The little pauses in conversations. The small silences in songs. The interval between chime and announcement where attention blooms and something else can take root. I stood, very slowly, and put the phone face down in the drawer by the bed. The chime sounded again, muffled. "Stand clear," the voice said, almost laughing with delight, "of the platform edge." I pressed my palm flat on the closed drawer. The wood was warm. "Not tonight," I said aloud to the empty room. Outside, a siren Dopplered past. The radiator kept ticking. The distance between the dresser and the wall felt like a mouth held just barely open. I lay down in the bed fully clothed, eyes on the ceiling, and held myself very still. I concentrated on objects, not gaps. The grain of the wood, the white paint glowing faintly from the streetlight outside, the exact count of cracks in the plaster above me. It is hard work, looking at things instead of between them. It takes your whole mind. Sometime before dawn, exhausted, I slept. In the morning, the phone was dead as a stone, though the cable had been plugged in all night. I walked to a shop to buy a new charger, passing the station entrance with its hungry stares, and I told myself I'd take the tram for a while, or better yet, walk. I told myself that when someone says mind the gap, I will. I will mind it like a wound. I will not give it mine. I missed the last train by 2 minutes. The platform clock blinked thrown in cold white digits as if timing my mistake, and the station emptied around me like a lung exhaling. I wasn't drunk or lost, just late. Project ran over, a printer jam, a colleague who wouldn't stop talking. I jogged up the steps into air that tasted like wet pennies and exhaust, rain misting steady, and found the bus canopies gleaming under sodium lamps. The night schedule board flickered. Routes stuttered through their loops of numbers and destinations, N3, N18, N53, but every time I blinked the list rearranged, swapping order as though the buses themselves were undecided. The next arrival line stilled on a symbol I didn't recognize, a 0 in a square, followed by depot. Then it changed again, N53 Central via Ring. ETA, 2 min. Fine, I muttered, breath fogging, and wrapped my coat tighter. The wind pushed wrappers in slow spirals. The sound of the city had an emptied-out quality, like somebody had scooped the middle from it with a spoon. No laughter, no brakes squealing, just a distant hum from the ring road and the hiss of rain on glass. The bus came without the usual precedence of light and rumble. One blink and the curb was empty. Another, and it was there, pulling in with a sigh. It was one of the old models with cloth seats and a rectangular destination sign that rattled when it idled. The number box glowed white with that same box 0, then flipped to N53 as if remembering itself. The driver's window reflected the lamps outside, but I could make out a profile. Cap low, shoulders broad, hands firm on the wheel. I tapped my card on the reader. The screen showed nothing. The machine, which in daylight beeped overly cheerful acceptance, hushed me with silence. A narrow strip of thermal paper slid out anyway and curled in my palm. It smelled faintly of something burned. Printed on it in cramped letters were the time and destination, end of the line. I said. Sit, the driver said without looking at me. His voice had the gravel of someone who hadn't spoken in hours. We're moving. Night buses are different. People are softer, bent into themselves. The rules relax and you forgive a little more, the rowdy, the sleeper whose head lolls into the aisle. But my fellow passengers that night didn't read as soft. They read as arranged. A teenager hunched in a hoodie near the back, headphones on. A woman with shopping bags that looked too full, plastic rim bowed with weight. A man in a dark coat with a briefcase across his knees. In the priority space, an empty stroller with a blanket bunched like a small forgotten animal. I chose a seat halfway down, where I could get to the driver fast if anything felt off. The interior smelled like warm plastic, damp wool, and the ghost of spilled coffee. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead with that insect buzz that sits just below hearing. The doors closed themselves in a long breath. The tires rolled like a yawn. Next stop, said the automated voice, soft and feminine and oddly deliberate on the vowels, Havenstraat. The bus turned, not toward Havenstraat, but toward the ring, gliding past shuttered kiosks and a kebab place lit blue behind its steel grate. I told myself night routes loop and zigzag. Maybe the roadworks ahead changed the route. I watched the raindrops vein their way down the glass and mapped breathing in the glass reflection. Me, the teen, the woman, the man, the stroller, 4 in a cradle. When I glanced back up, I counted again and saw 5 distinct foggy crescents on the window across from me. I shook my head. The 5th vanished like a smear wiped by an invisible hand. The bus ran smooth, too smooth. No jolt over the rails, no gear snatch, no sway. The outside lost texture, streetlights stretched between darknesses, storefronts smeared to grayscale. When we passed an intersection I recognized, the bus didn't slow, just drifted through a yellow turning red that hung a heartbeat too long. The driver's eyes in the rear view stayed on the road. The mirror showed my face, flattened, and beyond it, row after row of seats that seemed to extend farther than the physical length of the bus allowed. Next stop, the voice said, Havenstraat. We hadn't stopped. The woman with the shopping bags shifted and water bled through the bottom of one in a thin, dark line. The bags looked paper, but the drip sounded like pond water hitting a stone. Specific, cold. The teenager's headphones hissed, no tinny beat leaked. The briefcase man examined his fingernails without looking at them. His hand was too still. The stop cord above me twitched. It runs the length of the bus, red and slightly sticky, and it shivered as though plucked. The bell didn't sound. I didn't pull it. Next stop, the voice said. Haven. It hesitated, the way a scratched record stutters. Home. I hadn't told it where I lived. I leaned into the aisle. Is this the N53? I called. The driver's head tilted a millimeter. Once it is past midnight, he said. Routes forget their numbers. Sit down. That's not how. Sit down. The doors, which should have been sealed, sighed as if someone outside leaned on them. A cold smell crept in like cellar stone and metal in your mouth. The stroller's blanket moved just a little. The strap swung, though no bus motion justified it. The teen's head jerked in the glass and then stilled, lagging a beat behind his body. I sat. Calm, I told myself, is a thing you can fake until it's real. Breathe. In the buzzing, I picked out a second sound. A steady click, like a ticket punch handled by a patient hand. Click, click, click. Next stop, the voice said brightly, as if the hesitation had embarrassed it. Your street. I took out my phone, opened maps. The blue dot was there, my little beacon, but the map had slid sideways into blankness. Streets ended in gray margins. The bus route line, a thin purple snake, ran off the screen, and somewhere the interface had no icon for. My battery crawled down 2% in a minute. Driver, I said. I stood again, knuckles white on the pole. Look, I need to get. He raised a palm without turning. Keep your eyes low, he said. Don't look up when we pass under the long light. Don't speak if someone you know says your name, and don't pull the cord. What long light? You'll know it when we reach it. We reached it immediately. The bus glided under a span of straight, ceiling-bright fluorescence that threw every feature into colorless relief, and the mirror above the driver flashed an image of the bus that wasn't our bus. Packed to the doors, each seat cradling a face turned toward me, mouths slightly open as if in sleep or like fish in a bowl. And in the priority space, the stroller wasn't empty. I locked my jaw and dropped my gaze. The fluorescence receded. The hum kept on, and the click-click. I could feel eyes inspecting the back of my head, the way you can feel sunlight without looking at it. The corners of my mouth tingled. Something bumped my ankle. I snapped my head down. A spent transit ticket had slid across the aisle and gotten itself tangled in my shoelace. The thermal paper was worn to velvet at the edges. Printed on it, in the dot matrix font the system abandoned years ago, was a route number I hadn't seen since I was a kid. The name field, where the inspectors stamp your initials if you don't have exact fare, read Mira. I hadn't thought of her in a long time. Next stop, the voice cooed. Was that an echo under it, a lower register? Mira's place. The ticket clicked in my hand like something cooling. I slid it into the pocket of my coat and felt the fibers resist, as if the coat didn't want it inside. Is there a problem with the route? The briefcase man said suddenly too loudly without turning his head. It's after midnight, the driver said. That's not an answer, the man said and smiled at his fingernail. The bus slowed, not a proper brake toward a stop. No indicator, no signal, but a viscosity in the air like syrup, as if we had driven into something thicker than night. The city pared away. The lamp posts along the verge grew farther apart until the spaces between them became the scenery. We passed a stop shelter with no bench, just a dark rectangle where people had once sat. Its glass panels were covered in wet handprints, too many, some at toddler height, some at the height of someone standing on the bench that wasn't there. The empty stroller squeaked. It wasn't a sound the stroller could make. It was the kind of squeak a door makes when pressure equalizes. The teen's head tilted, ear cupped toward the middle of the aisle. The woman with the shopping bags looked down at her lap as water slithered off the bottom edges and collected under her shoes, forming a slick, dark coin. Next stop, the voice said, almost tender. Inspection. The driver sucked a breath. Do not, he began. A hand I didn't own shot up and yanked the stop cord. The bell chimed, delicate, polite. The cord jumped. Every head on the bus turned toward me at the same time, as if attached to one string. The baby blanket in the stroller went still. The driver cursed in a language I didn't recognize and stamped the brake. The bus's weight leaned forward, doors sighed. The cold smell punched in hard enough to water my eyes. We had stopped in a place that had no location. There was no sidewalk beyond the doors, No curb, no station sign. There was damp blackness that looked like a face pressed to glass from the wrong side. From that dark, a shape stepped aboard. He wore an inspector's coat from a uniform that had never quite existed, epaulettes too long by a centimeter, buttons in a pattern that made your eyes lose the thread. He carried, not a punch, but something that clicked like one, long and narrow, and the finish on it reflected nothing. His hat sat low. Where his face should have been was not skin or cloth, but an absence polished to brightness. My eyes slid off it, found the window, found my own open mouth. "Tickets," he said. His voice did not come from any particular direction. "Tickets, please. Proof of origin." The briefcase man held up his slip obediently, hand precise. The inspector did not take it. The clicking instrument reached and pressed the paper without touching it. The hole it left wasn't a hole, but a dent in the air that sighed shut. The man's smile tightened as if from a cramp. His coat was a little empty around the shoulders afterward. He looked smaller. "Proof of origin," the inspector repeated, turning toward the woman with the bags. "I paid," she whispered. Her mouth didn't shape the words quite right. Under the shopping bags, water ran in rivulets and tried to hide in the grooves of the rubber floor. He angled his instrument toward her. "Not destination," he said, gentle as a lullaby. "Origin." Her eyes met mine for a second. They were a travel poster's blue, but emptied of depth. She reached into her bags, into water that made no sound when disturbed, and withdrew nothing. She opened her hands to show the nothing to him. He clicked the nothing anyway. The blanket in the stroller rose an inch as if breathing, then smoothed flat. "Don't answer him," the driver said, eyes on the windshield, knuckles white. His voice shook. "Keep quiet. He can't take what you don't name." The inspector stepped down the aisle with the unhurried grace of someone who owns the building. With each step, the fluorescence palpated, not flicker, not dim, exactly, but the light became thick, gelatinous, a presence to wade through. The teen in the back looked up. He pulled off one cup of his headphones. Under the foam, a whisper seeped out, thready and thin, but I recognized the cadence of my own voice on an old phone call. Mira, laughing. Mira saying, "Tell me where you are." "Ticket," the inspector said and stopped at my seat. He did not look at me because he had nothing to look with. The instrument poised in the air like an erect finger about to scold. "Origin." I held up the strip the machine had given me. End of the line. The strip fluttered in a wind that wasn't there. "This is a destination," he said, almost kind. He touched the instrument to the paper. The sound it made reached into my teeth. Cold sped up my wrist. My hand went numb. "Where were you going when she called?" he asked, and the word she tried to wear my memory like a borrowed coat. It didn't fit. I kept my mouth shut so tight my jaw popped. The driver's voice reached me, thin. "Come forward now," he said, quick. I stood. The inspector's instrument twitched, quick as a snake. It brushed my chest. A pressure developed between my shoulder blades, as if something behind me had hooked its fingers under my skin and tugged lightly, experimentally, testing the give. I grabbed for the pole and took a step toward the front, dragging my body through light that didn't want to part. "Don't run," the inspector said. The voice was a ticket stamp, final. "Just name it. Say it, and I'll let you off." I thought of doors you open that never close properly again. I thought of midnight rules. Give your name only to those who can return it. I stumbled to the driver's shield and found space beside his seat where a passenger would never be allowed. He didn't look at me. His face had a fierce, miserable set to it. "Put your hand on the wheel," he said. "Hold it straight. When I tell you, hit the switch that floods the interior. We're going to outrun him to the ring." "What if he?" I began. Behind me, metal clicked, and the pressure in my back increased, like a seatbelt tightening by increments. My shadow in the cashbox glass had its head cocked the wrong way. "Hold it," the driver snarled. "You pulled the cord. You opened the doors. Now you pay attention or we don't make it to anywhere that counts." I gripped the wheel. It vibrated subtly, as though the bus wanted to choose for itself, and was letting me believe I controlled it. The driver slammed the doors. The inspector's instrument caught between them made no sound. The doors shut on it, as if on smoke. He floored the accelerator. The bus lurched, shot forward. The absence that was the inspector didn't fall. It was suddenly 2 rows back. He never moved. Distance adjusted itself around him. Now, the driver barked. I hit the interior lights. They came up to surgical brightness, filling every scratch, every crumb, every abandoned ticket stub with declared presence. The inspector recoiled a fraction of a fraction. The baby blanket, wrinkled with wind and a small handprint, far too defined, pressed up from beneath, then smoothed away. Again, the driver said, and weaved the bus under the long light. Keep him in the long light. I toggled the switch. The fluorescents purred, and the glass above us, the rear view, flashed that wrong image of a bus too long and too full. In the mirror, the inspector stood directly behind me, breathless, face shining with absence. In the space of the bus, he was 3 rows back. In the mirror's bus, his instrument hovered over the back of my neck. If you don't name your origin, he said, the voice carrying up and down the length of the vehicle at once, you can't be returned. Lost items often end up at the depot. I'm not an item, I said. My breath came out white. The windows fogged, and in the fog, like a finger writing too careful to be a child's, letters formed, D-O-N-L-O-B-A, kek. Believe him, the driver said. Outside, the ring road's lamps streamed toward us like a necklace too long for the throat that wore it. Cars were absent. The asphalt looked wet, not with rain, but with depth. Every time the inspector clicked his instrument, the engine coughed, the lights dimmed and rose. My hands had turned to pins. The stud of the switch under my left index finger was the only real thing in the world. He reached again, the instrument a polite intruder in the space of my chest. Last chance, he said pleasantly. Say where you began. I began, I said, tasting blood where I'd bitten my tongue, at the bus stop like everybody else. That is not an origin, he said, patient. That is a location. Same thing, he sighed, the sound of paper tearing. The pressure between my shoulder blades ratcheted up. Something in my shape began to slip forward as if my shadow wore greased shoes. My vision produced a thin black line at the edge, which I knew without wanting to know was a rip, a seam opening. The teen in the back pulled his other headphone cup off and watched me with enormous eyes. The man with the briefcase's smile had smoothed itself to nothing. The woman's bags ceased dripping. They hung like sacks of leaves. Pay, the driver grated. Pay and make it count. With what? Whatever it asks for. I looked down at my hand still wrapped around the ticket, the strip slick with sweat. My name wasn't printed on it. The inspector's instrument hovered, eager. I thought of rules again, midnight rules at kitchen tables. Never say your name to the dark when it asks nicely. I took the ticket between thumb and finger. With my other hand, I dug in my pocket for a pen, useless, silly. The pen shook. I wrote my name in the space under end of the line. The ink bled thinly, as if the paper drank reluctantly. I folded it once again and shoved it into the ticket slot above the driver's cash tray where, during the day, people feed coins. It should not have accepted paper. It accepted. The slot tightened around my fingers, took the slip whole. A little light that had never existed there before turned green. The inspector drew back as if struck. The instrument snapped shut with a final click. Payment accepted, the route voice said in a voice that could not decide whether it belonged to a computer or a person. Next stop, home. Hold it, the driver said. He accelerated. The ring lamps passed, spilled, and then the road realigned into streets I knew. Car dealerships asleep, a patch of scrub, the cookie factory whose scent of vanilla turns cloying in heat. The pressure in my back eased. The seam at the edge of my vision stitched itself with light. The stroller's blanket sagged, as if someone had suddenly remembered the shape air is supposed to have and returned it. The inspector stood in the aisle with his instrument lowered. He did not turn. He did not need to. He stepped backward, or rather he did not step, and the bus breathed him toward the rear as we made ordinary speed. He reached the hinged emergency door that no one uses, placed his absent face against the glass, and became a reflection on it, and then a smudge, and then nothing at all. The doors would not open again until the city remembered itself. When they did, it was with a clatter that sounded blissfully mortal. I stumbled off at my stop, my actual stop, with its graffiti and its chewing gum fossils and the ad peeling at one corner, and inhaled night like a human. Don't ride after midnight, the driver said without looking at me. Numbers forget themselves. I leaned back in, meaning to ask him his name. It seemed important to thank him properly, to anchor him with a word that held weight. The cab smelled like cigarettes and old coffee and something else, the smell of long hours when everyone who matters is asleep. He met my eyes in the mirror. They were gray and very tired. The bus pulled away. The number in its box flickered rapidly. N530, Depot, collection, blank, and then settled on nothing I could read. I walked home with the feeling you get when you've told a lie that saved your life. The streetlights blinked in their usual little arrhythmias. The city breathed around me, not empty now but full of 1,000 invisible routines. In my pocket, the outline of the ticket should have been a comfort. I touched for it and found it missing. Of course it would be. Payment accepted. My building's glass door gave me my reflection. My face looked like mine, if a little paler, if a little older. I fumbled my keys, clumsy, and finally got them in the lock. When I glanced down, my phone lit with a notification that belonged to another hour. Unknown number, missed call. The name field for the contact was blank. No number, just a gap filled in with the faintest shadow of letters, as if someone had written a name and erased it so carefully that the paper bruised. My own name, in my contacts, in my banking app, in my email signature, had softened at the edges like bread left in rain. I said it aloud in the corridor to see if it still fit. It did, mostly. It tasted a little thinner. In my apartment, I turned on every light. I made tea, because that's what you do when you need to persuade yourself that reality is a thing with steps and rituals. The kettle shrieked. The heat rose. It smelled normal. I stood by the window and watched for buses. When the clock flipped to 0 again, the room's shadows all leaned toward the door. They didn't move. They gathered themselves like sleepers rolling toward warmth. I looked down. My own shadow crouched a degree out of sync with me. When I lifted my hand, it lifted too, but with the smallest, most polite delay, a good passenger waiting for permission to disembark. I slept, or I did something that resembled the concept. In that in-between, a recorded voice with too much kindness in it said my old street name and then corrected itself. A bell chimed, delicate. Somewhere, a baby stroller squeaked. In the morning, I made a note to order an earlier taxi next time, to leave work on time, to say no to colleagues with open mouths and small emergencies. I put the note on my fridge. The handwriting looked steady enough. When I left for work, a bus passed at the end of the block. It was the wrong model for our neighborhood. It did not slow or speed. It did not turn its indicators. The destination box showed a wide white square with a 0 inside it like an eye. I did not wave. I did not look back. I walked to the train and kept my head down when the platform clock blinked exactly noon. That night, just before midnight, my phone buzzed. The call flashed for a breath, an edge of a shape, and vanished. In the silence after, outside, I heard it, the soft, polite chime of a bell you only hear if you've paid in full. I told myself it would be a quick in and out. 40 minutes, tops. Print the quarterly report, update the deployment notes, cue the overnight backup. I'd left my laptop charger on my desk anyway, and I didn't want to start tomorrow with a dead battery and an irritated boss. At 11:41 p.m., I swiped my badge at the glass doors. The lobby of our office building, 7 floors of glass and aluminum in a dead part of the business district, woke up in patches, a hum in the ceiling, a click from somewhere behind the receptionist's desk, a sluggish shake of the automatic doors. Motion sensors ticked the lights on one by one along the long, pale corridor, and the glossy floor reflected ghostly versions of me that seemed to lag a fraction of a second behind. The air had that after-hours flavor, cooler, metallic, tinged with dust and last week's cleaner. My shoes sounded too loud. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open with a half-hearted sigh, as though it would have preferred to keep sleeping. I pressed 6 and watched the numbers climb with the sickly blue glow of the panel washing my hand. I'd worked here for over a year, but it felt unfamiliar at night, like a friend's face under fluorescent lights, features familiar but wrong. On 6, the hall was darker than the lobby. Only the exit signs burned red, one at each end, like eyes. Our open floor plan lay in a shallow basin of darkness. The motion lights hesitated, then flicked on in a domino run. Branded wall mural, kitchen nook, clusters of desks, the glass-walled conference room where chairs sat in a perfect circle around a black table. At the far end, the server closet's louvers leaked a steady white glow. "It's fine," I said out loud, because the air didn't like silence. My voice came back thinner, this high, papery thing that made me feel lonely. I dumped my backpack at my desk and started my ritual. Kettle on, coffee pod jammed into the machine, laptop open with a stutter of notifications that didn't matter anymore. The printer in the copy room rattling awake across the aisle, the way it always did when it sensed a device on the network. When the coffee machine started its little dying animal wheeze, I felt the first ripple of wrongness. It was small, nothing you could complain about in a ticket. The electric kettle seemed to breathe. It drew in a rattly breath and exhaled a hiss, drawing a thin line of steam that curled and twisted as though trying to write something in the air. "Stop it," I told myself. "You're alone and it's late and you're an idiot. That's all." Coffee in hand, I took the long way to the copy room, because the long way kept you under the motion sensors. If you cut across by the glass conference room, there was always a heartbeat where the darkness didn't move and the glass reflected a taller, thinner version of you from across the table. I'd done that by accident my first week here and felt my stomach drop like an elevator. The copy room smelled like warm plastic. The printer sputtered to life, tick-tick whirring, its little green screen declaring it ready. I began the print job for the report and left the stack to grow, curving and fanning, bleeding charts and numbers. The air vent above my head clicked. Somewhere down the hall, a door tapped once, politely, as though it would tap twice if I asked it to. The lights went out. Only the emergency strips along the baseboards remained, thin neon tracks that showed the bones of the hallway but not the flesh. The printer, to its credit, kept going, unfazed. In the dim, the ceiling hummed deeper, like a throat clearing. "Motion sensors," I said, though I hadn't been that still. I stepped out into the hallway, waving one arm. The lights took an extra beat to wake up, like an older dog. They popped back on in a slow sweep and brought the building's colors back with them. The blue of the mural, the matte black of the conference room table, the stainless curve of the kitchen faucet. The printer spat out a final page with a slap that made me jump. I laughed at myself, then winced because laughter sounded hostile in the empty place. Back at my desk, I opened the deployment notes and started typing. After a few minutes, the edges of my vision softened. The screen seemed overly bright. I blinked, blamed the coffee. Words were slippery. I had to go back to fix a sentence I'd just written because it seemed to have rearranged itself while my eyes were away. A soft, wet sound came from the kitchen. I froze. It sounded like someone had dragged a palm across the stainless steel fridge door, a slow shh, like a whisper you could rub between forefinger and thumb. "Plumbing," I said, although there's nothing in that kitchen that could shush. I stood, made myself walk to the kitchen, and found nothing. A ring of moisture glistened on the countertop by the sink. My coffee mug sat on my desk, untouched. A second ring overlapped the first, as if two mugs had been sitting together a moment before and one of them had been lifted away. I started, then stopped. It meant nothing. Someone could have left those rings earlier. Cleaning had probably missed them. Back at my desk, I sat and the chair rolled half an inch on its own, like someone had nudged it from behind. The air vent above me clicked again, and I realized the air had a subtle change in taste. It's hard to explain taste in air. It wasn't a smell. It was a weight. A new layer, faint, like warm pennies pressed under the tongue of the building. I swallowed, throat suddenly too dry, then took a sip of coffee that felt colder than it should have been. On my second page of notes, Slack pinged. I flinched so hard my wrist knocked the mouse off the pad. Nobody should be pinging me at this hour. The ping came from a channel that should have been idle. The message said, "Cleaner, are you still here?" The avatar was a gray circle. I clicked the username. Blank profile. I typed, "Yes." "Who's this?" The typing indicator appeared immediately. 3 dots, patient. Vanished. Reappeared. Cleaner, leave. My scalp prickled. I typed again, fingers heavier than normal. "Is this IT? Is there maintenance tonight?" Dots. Gone. The ceiling hummed a little deeper, that sub-basement of sound that you didn't notice until it doubled on itself and became a vibration in your teeth. A thin alarm peeped somewhere very far away. Not the fire alarm. A polite cousin. A second Slack window appeared, unbidden, sliding to the right of the first. It was a direct message. From me, away. I stared confused. It was my avatar. It was my name. The status read away with the little gray moon. The message said, "Me away, don't go into the conference room." I turned very slowly to look at the glass-walled space. All I could see was the brave geometry of chairs and table, and beyond, the hallway's reflection. But as I watched, the lights just beyond the glass stuttered. A shadow skated across the floor inside, quick as a fish, and I felt every muscle sit up and listen. The printer started again, on its own. I walked toward it without wanting to, because you do that when you're alone at night. You go toward the thing to prove it can't be a thing. Pages slid out, half covered in black. The toner had been told to drown the page. When I picked the first sheet up and wiped the extra toner with a thumb, the letters emerged in negative space. Leave. The next page. Now. The hair rose on my arms in full shock. My mouth did that stupid dry click again. I told myself it was a prank. I told myself there were 1,000 ways to do this. I told myself to stop saying myself because it was starting to feel like there might be more than one of me. The lights cut out a second time, only a breath, but long enough for the glass conference room to show me a version of the hallway that had someone in it. Tall, still, not a person, not exactly, because its stillness was too pure. The lights popped on. The hallway was empty. Behind the glass, the chair nearest the door had turned itself a degree or two, the way a cat will angle an ear at a sound. I decided then that this was stupid, that adrenaline wears you out faster than anything, that I should pack and go home and explain tomorrow that the report could wait because the printer had decided to audition for a haunting. I stacked the pages, stuffed them into my bag, slammed my laptop shut. The hallway lights didn't come back on this time when I waved. The emergency strips were enough to show me the outline of the corridor. As I walked, I realized my legs felt strange, as if the joints were made of soft wood. Heat climbed up my throat, a syrupy heat that didn't match the cool air on my face. My head ached at the back, a dull wedge pushing forward. In the lobby, the glass doors were stubborn. I swiped my badge. The lock clicked. The doors moved an inch, and then met something like a hand pressed flat on the other side. The inch of night outside looked thinner than it should have. The air on this side felt thicker. I swiped again, and the doors gave up and opened, just enough to allow me to slide out onto the steps. Cool night air stroked my cheeks. It tasted clean in a way it never does, like I had dropped face first into spring water. That's when I understood. The heat in my throat, the dull wedge in my head, the sluggish limbs. It was subtle, nothing like the death you imagine. It was soft. The air inside the building was wrong. My phone buzzed. A calendar notification. Generator test. I hadn't seen it when it came earlier because I had turned off non-essential alerts. A line under the event noted, basement ventilation under maintenance. Do not occupy floors 1-7 during test. My skin crawled in one single motion from ankle to scalp. I turned back toward the lobby. Through the glass, the exit signs burned red and patient. Somewhere below my feet, I felt, rather than heard, a new thrum begin. The generator must have started. If the ventilation was under maintenance, the exhaust could be seeping into places it didn't belong. Carbon monoxide is odorless. You don't notice it, you just get slow and then you sleep. Someone else would see this, I told myself. The cleaning crew, security on the night shift. The building was never completely empty, but the lobby desk was dark. The security office door stood half open, interior blank. The cleaner slack, the blank profile, the tall stillness in the glass. I don't know why I went back in. Some idiot heroic circuit must live in any person who's ever been praised for staying late. I covered my nose with my sleeve because that felt like doing something, and I went for the stairwell because the elevator was an iron lung and I wasn't getting inside anything that breathed for me. On 3, the air turned thicker. My head throbbed in time with the thrum from below. On 1, the stairwell door resisted, then let go with a soft seal-breaking pop. The hallway smelled faintly of hot metal, a smell that wasn't the poison but rode along with it, like a cologne the real danger wore. The generator room was past the freight elevator, through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" in raised letters that felt warmer than the wall around them when my fingers slid over them. Something had changed in the building's hum. It had a shape now, a pulse that felt like a voice almost speaking. I pressed my ear to the generator room door and heard a steady engine, and under it, a smaller tapping. The tapping was irregular. It was the tapping of fingers. I opened the door. Heat hugged me. A diesel smell, not the poison, not the danger, but a signpost. The generator was a yellow beast with black ribs, vibrating clouds of shadow on the wall. The tapping was papers fluttering on a clipboard hooked near the fuel line. The top sheet had been ripped and pinned again at a crooked angle. Someone had scrawled across it in thick marker, "Vents off. Do not run." The engine thudded, patient, like it could keep thudding forever. The emergency stop was a red mushroom under a plastic safety cover. I stood there longer than I should have. My thoughts were slow, like they were being stirred with a wooden spoon. My eyes kept trying to close for a delicious little second. Just a blink, a deep blink. In the ripple of the generator's shadow on the wall, something moved that wasn't just a ripple. A figure stood beside me, tall, like in the glass. Not a person, not exactly, because it didn't make the air move. It didn't cast a shadow separate from the generators, but as the ripples slid over it, they slowed, as if reluctant to cross it. It lifted an arm, not fully, not a grand gesture, but enough to point with a single long finger directly at the red emergency stop. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I stepped forward and slapped the cover up and punched the stop. The generator coughed once, twice, like a man surprised. It wound down in a mournful spiral. The hum of the building changed in a rush, like a held breath finally thrown away. In the sudden quiet, I realized how loud my own blood had been. My knees bent without permission, and I sat on the concrete, leaning against the warm metal. The figure stayed where it was, an absence with edges. It tilted its head the way a person might if they were making sure you were still looking. Then, as the engine's last warmth leached into the room, it seemed to thin. The ripples regained their speed. There was only the generator, the clipboard, the quiet. I must have stayed there a while. When I stood, pins and needles rained up my legs. I staggered to the stairwell and climbed, one hand on the rail. On one, the lobby's lights were back to their ordinary bright, the glass doors yawning wider now like they were tired of being doors. I stepped out into a fresher, colder midnight than before and sat on the steps, coughing once, twice, tasting the back of my throat. My phone vibrated. A Slack message. Cleaner. Good. I stared at it until a second message came through from me away. Take the stairs. I typed back with clumsy fingers. Who are you? The typing dots appeared, then vanished. Then a final message from me away arrived. Don't stay late anymore. Security pulled up at 12:32 a.m., lights cutting 2 white bars across the glass. The guard was apologetic and brisk, and radios filled the lobby with competent chatter that made me feel embarrassingly small for having believed in tall stillnesses. He told me there had been a mix-up, that facilities should have locked the building. Generator tests happen monthly, he said. Alarms didn't fire because the system's in maintenance mode. You should have gotten the email. I did, I said, because there was no point telling him about the tall not person, or the lights that took too long to come back, or the printer that had printed messages like notes from a dungeon. He wrote my statement next to the marker scrawl on the clipboard that someone had already moved to the reception desk, like a prop. Vents off. Do not run. The marker had dug furrows you could feel in the paper. He walked me back to 6 so I could get my bag. Upstairs, the floor looked like a floor, just desks and chairs and an honest hum. The printer slept without complaint. The glass conference room reflected us both. On my desk, my laptop had powered itself back on. I hadn't left it that way. A window sat open over my deployment notes. A new file blinked in my documents, created at 12:08 a.m. The file was named Thix. I opened it. Only a single line sat on the page. He fell asleep in the conference room. Don't let them forget me. My mouth filled with that metallic water again. For a second, the room seemed to tip, the way it does on an escalator when you aren't ready. I turned to tell the guard, but he was still at the door, talking into his radio, not looking at me, his reflection in the glass broken by a chair back. I copied the line. I emailed it to myself. I printed it too, because paper waits in ways screens don't. The printer obeyed like a dog that had stopped pretending to be a wolf. The page slid out warm and thin. I folded it into my pocket and left without even pretending I might finish the report. I slept on my couch with the windows open and woke to the ordinary, mercifully small concerns of a morning. A toothbrush, a bus schedule. The thought of stepping back into the building made my head feel tight and small. I called in and said I'd be working from home, and I said it like a joke, and my boss laughed and said, "Lucky you." At noon, while the sun made cruel promises outside, a final Slack message arrived from me away. "It's quieter now." I stared at it until the three dots appeared again. They hovered there, patient as a heartbeat. Then they vanished and did not return. I don't stay past 9 anymore. If I have to, I take the stairs. When I pass the glass, I don't look in, not even as a dare. On windy days, when the vents click, I pause and listen. I listen the way you listen for someone you forgot was missing. And sometimes, late in the afternoon when the building exhales, the air tastes clean and thin for a second, like spring water in my mouth, and I think, good, good, good. Stay that way. I kept the paper in my coat. It says in thick marker grooves, "Do not run." I know what it meant. But sometimes in the second between night and day, when the office is thinking about which to be, I feel that other meaning under my skin, the one I would tell anyone who walked into that building at 11:41 p.m. with a laptop and a coffee and the careless faith of the living. Run.